The Bible reading for this evening is from Deuteronomy chapter 9, beginning from verse 1 to verse 17, and this can be found on page 187 in the few Bibles. Deuteronomy 9, 1 to 17, page 187. Hear, Israel, you are now about to cross the Jordan to go in and dispossess nations greater and stronger than you, with large cities that have walls up to the sky. The people are strong and tall, Anakites. You know about them and have heard it said, who can stand up against the Anakites? But be assured today that the Lord your God is the one who goes across ahead of you like a devouring fire. He will destroy them, he will subdue them before you, and you will drive them out and annihilate them quickly, as the Lord has promised you. After the Lord your God has driven them out before you, do not say to yourself, the Lord has brought me here to take possession of this land because of my righteousness. No, it is on account of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord is going to drive them out before you. It is not because of your righteousness or your integrity that you are going in to take possession of their land, but on account of the wickedness of these nations, the Lord your God will drive them out before you to accomplish what he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Understand then that it is not because of your righteousness that the Lord your God is giving you this good land to possess, for you are a stiff-necked people. Remember this and never forget how you aroused the anger of the Lord your God in the wilderness. From the day you left Egypt until you arrived here, you have been rebellious against the Lord. At Horeb, you aroused the Lord's wrath so that he was angry enough to destroy you. When I went up on the mountain to receive the tablets of stone, the tablets of the covenant that the Lord had made with you, I stayed on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. I ate no bread and drank no water. The Lord gave me 2 stone tablets, inscribed by the finger of God. On them were all the commandments the Lord proclaimed to you on the mountain out of the fire on the day of the assembly. At the end of the 40 days and 40 nights, the Lord gave me the 2 stone tablets, the tablets of the covenant. Then the Lord told me, go down from here at once, because your people whom you brought out of Egypt have become corrupt. They have turned away quickly from what I commanded them and have made an idol for themselves. And the Lord said to me, I have seen these people, and they are a stiff-necked people indeed. Let me alone so that I may destroy them and blot out their name from under heaven. And I will make you into a nation stronger and more numerous than they. So I turned and went down from the mountain while it was ablaze with fire. The 2 tablets of the covenant were in my hands. When I looked, I saw that you had sinned against the Lord your God. You had made for yourselves an idol cast in the shape of a calf. You had turned aside quickly from the way that the Lord has commanded you. So I took the 2 tablets and threw them out of my hands, breaking them to pieces before your eyes. This is the word of the Lord.
Thank you, Ranjit. Now, has anyone been to Mount Sinai here? Mount Sinai in Egypt? Yes, there we go. We've got to take a... I'm pretty sure it's not the real Mount Sinai, but it is what they call it, and it is absolutely stunning. And my brother and I climbed it many years ago. I was younger and fitter then. And it involved getting up at 3 a.m. because you needed to get up the mountain before the full heat of the Egyptian sun hit you. So we walked and scrambled in the dark for several hours. We had to avoid lots of grumpy camels on the route. Camels aren't the happiest creatures at 4 a.m. I'm not sure they're the happiest creatures any time. And we finally got to the top, and we got there just before sunrise. And we sat and we waited. And it was absolutely stunning, the moment when the sun came and just peaked above the horizon and lit it up. I've got a photo here which is not going to do it justice, but it will give you an idea of Mount Sinai. Genuinely one of the most breathtaking moments of my life. It was awesome. But it had been a hard journey. My brother and I had been up all night because there were mosquitoes in our hut and we were determined to kill them all. Our feet were aching. We were starving hungry because we're blokes and we hadn't thought to pack any food for the journey. And so it was a really tough journey. But it was worth it because the view was beautiful. Now that is my hope for tonight. This is going to be a tough journey as we look at these verses together. There are some really uncomfortable verses in this passage, and we're not going to duck them. But I need you to trust me when I say, if we put in the hard work, if we're prepared to make this journey, then the view is stunning when we get there. If we're going to listen to these verses, if we're prepared to let God speak to us through them, we will leave here amazed at who God is and all that he has done. That's been my prayer for each of us tonight. So let's dive in. Deuteronomy 9. Remember where we are in the story? 40 years the Israelites have spent in the wilderness wandering around because they disobeyed God's words. 40 years of discipline. Because as we saw last week, God was using those 40 years to get them ready for the promised land, the land of Canaan that he was leading them to. 40 long years. And now they're standing on the edge of the promised land, and God is speaking these words to them through Moses. Have a look down what he says. Deuteronomy 9, verse 1. Hear, Israel. You are now about to cross the Jordan and go in and dispossess nations greater and stronger than you, with large cities that have walls up to the sky. The people are strong and tall. Anakites. You know about them. You've heard it said, who can stand up against the Anakites? But be assured today that the Lord your God is the one who goes across ahead of you like a devouring fire. He will destroy them. He will subdue them before you, and you will drive them out and annihilate them quickly, as the Lord has promised you. Those are the first 3 verses of Deuteronomy 9, and those 3 verses are the promise in Deuteronomy chapter 9. Because there's this wonderful land called Canaan. It's a rich and fertile land. We heard last week brooks, streams, and deep springs gushing out into the valleys and hills. Great land. But it's full of these massive people, the Anakites, strong and tall and feared by all. Their cities are large. The city walls reach up to the sky. So how on earth are the Israelites going to get into the promised land? That is the question. God's answer: I'll get you in. I'll destroy your enemies. Be assured today that the Lord your God is the one who goes across ahead of you like a devouring fire. He will destroy them. He will subdue them before you. So if you're an Israelite at around 1400 BC, those are brilliant words. You can't do it yourself, but God's going to do it for you. It's a promise. But you could be forgiven for sitting here tonight and think, but I'm not an Israelite in 1400 BC. Why do I care about this promise that God made for them? What is this distant land got to do with us today? In fact, last time I checked, there isn't a place called Canaan on the map. If you put Canaan into Google Maps, you'll find a Chinese restaurant in East London. True story, Canaan Chinese. There's no Canaan anymore. I guess there aren't all that many Israelites here tonight. Why do we care? Ask yourself this question. If you're a follower of Jesus Christ, what has he promised you? Or put it this way, where is your Canaan? Can you join the dots that the Bible gives us? Jesus says, John chapter 14, he says, my Father's house has many rooms, and I'm going to prepare a place for you. I'll come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. Do you hear our promise? Heaven is what we call it. New creation is perhaps a better name for it. But the point is, this is the promised land for followers of Jesus. The place where death can't harm us. No mourning, pain, or tears. That's our promise. But what do? We see the Anakites. Who are our Anakites? Well, our Anakites are called sin and death. And they've got big cities and high walls. So what do? We look at our lives and we say, God could not possibly want me. There's no way he's going to let me into heaven. Not if he knows what I'm like. And so the terrifying prospect of a hopeless and meaningless death looms. But God says to you and me, he says, be assured today that the Lord your God is the one who goes across ahead of you like a devouring fire. He will destroy them. He will subdue them before you. That is the promise. You see, we don't need to fear our Anakites. We don't need to fear sin and death. God will deal with them. And we need to ask ourselves, do we know that freedom? Have we got that confidence? He will destroy them. This is not just good news for the Israelites. This is good news for us. When we understand the whole Bible story, how it joins together, where we fit into it, this is great news. It's a promise for all who trust in Jesus. But the problem with a promise is that a promise can be quite a distant thing. It's a bit like you're standing at the bottom of a mountain ready to start the trek, and you meet some people on their way down. And as they get to you, they say, oh, it's fantastic. It's great at the top. It's really worth it. Now, that helps a bit, doesn't it? It sort of spurs you on, but it doesn't get rid of the pain of the struggle. And there's big struggle in these verses, because whilst these verses do point to a God who defeats sin and death, actually these verses are first and foremost about the Anakites, about a tribe of rather tall human beings who just happened to live in Canaan, which was the land that God had promised to the Israelites in 1400 BC. It seems to be a sort of classic wrong time, wrong place. You don't want to be an Anakite, because what's going to happen to the Anakites? He will destroy them. He will subdue them before you, and you will drive them out and annihilate them quickly, as the Lord has promised you. Now, can you hear the struggle in those words? If you're not struggling yet, go home, read Joshua chapter 11, where the account of this is played out, and you will be struggling. You'll feel it, that the language is unwavering, totally destroyed, not sparing anyone that breathed. And they're horrific scenes. So how do we reconcile this? We've got a God who makes great promises. I'll do it for you. But a God who is willing to see a whole tribe destroyed. How do you reconcile that? To help us think it through, come with me to a courtroom and place yourself in the viewing gallery. In the dock of the courtroom is a man who's been charged with the murder of Madeleine McCann. Do people still remember Madeleine? Chuck her photo up, Josh. Here's the photo. It's a haunting photo. I find this really heartbreaking. Madeleine went missing from her holiday home in Portugal it was a week before her 4th birthday. And Madeleine's never been found. But imagine, news breaks, a man's been arrested. And there you are, you're in court for the trial, and the evidence has been presented as DNA evidence. That's conclusive. There's mobile cell data, there's number tracking on the number plate, there's witness reports. It all ties together. The evidence of the defendant's guilt is overwhelming. And you've got that moment when the jury comes back into the courtroom and the foreman of the jury stands up to deliver the verdict of the jury, and there is silence in the court. How are you feeling in that moment? What are you longing for? Do you feel it? Because we have hearts that cry out for justice. We long for evil to be punished. There's this restlessness until punishment is enacted. That's why I find this such a distressing photo, because there has not been justice for Madeline. Whatever happened to her, justice has not been served, not yet. Now come back to the Anakites, because we need to see here that justice is being served. The Anakites were getting what they deserved. This is hard, but have a look down, verse 4. After the Lord your God has driven them out before you, do not say to yourself, the Lord has brought me here to take possession of this land because of my righteousness. No. It's on account of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord is going to drive them out before you. Can you hear? God is so clear. The wickedness of the Anakites meant they deserved their destruction. Now, how do you respond to that? I reckon our responses will probably fall into one of two categories. There will either be people who say, ha, they got what they deserved. And we won't quite put it like this, but it's a kind of good riddance to bad rubbish mentality. Or we will be people who say, oh, hang on a sec. No, that is deeply, deeply unfair. I can't accept that. Now, those are very different responses. You'll probably know which of those two you veer towards. I reckon we'll all go one way or the other. But both responses suffer from the same error, because both responses miss the fact that we deserve the same punishment. Can you see that? The person who says, ha, they got what's coming to them. That person is blind to the fact that the Anakites' wickedness is your wickedness and my wickedness. You see, often at this point in a sermon, if you're talking about sort of a destruction of a tribe, the preacher will give a list of sins that archaeology suggests that the Anakites were committing, sort of murder, rape, child sacrifice. And there may be great truth in that, but actually it serves to distance us from them. Lucky we're not like them. But we know that's not true. We are like them. Wickedness is a feature common to the whole of humanity. There'll be different scales, but it's the same condition. And actually, it's similar for the person who says, that is deeply, deeply unfair. I can't stand that. The question there is not so much who we are, but who God is. Because the attempt there is to turn God into a God who doesn't really mind sin. In fact, you probably wouldn't call it sin. Maybe you'd call it naughtiness. Just a little bit of naughtiness. And God becomes the sort of cuddly grandfather figure who's just happy to overlook the naughtiness of his grandchild because of his great love. Do you see, both of those responses miss the fact that we deserve the same punishment as the Anakites. God was right to punish them. God is right to punish us. And that's the struggle here. We find this hard. I think probably every funeral visit I've ever done, whether it's a Christian funeral visit or not, I've sat there and the relatives of the deceased have been at great pains to tell me quite what a good person the deceased was. Because the implicit assumption is they were so good, God will definitely want them, Mr. Vicar. We very easily miss the fact that we deserve the same punishment. But listen to the emphasis in these verses. I'll read from verse 4 again. After the Lord your God has driven them out before you, do not say to yourself, the Lord has brought me here to take possession of this land because of my righteousness. No. It's on account of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord is going to drive them out before you. It's not because of your righteousness or your integrity that you're going to take possession of their land, but on account of the wickedness of these nations. The Lord your God will drive them out before you to accomplish what he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Just in case you've missed it. Understand then that it's not because of your righteousness that the Lord your God is giving you this good land to possess. For you're a stiff-necked people. 3 times, just so we don't miss it. He could not be clearer. And he continues, verse 7, remember this and never forget how you aroused the anger of the Lord your God in the wilderness. From the day you left Egypt until you arrived here, you've been rebellious against the Lord. At Horeb, you aroused the Lord's wrath, so he was angry enough to destroy you. To catch the journey, it's crystal clear, Israelites, you are no better than the Anakites. You're equally deserving of God's judgment. The question for us is, are we prepared to hear that ourselves? That we deserve God's judgment? Now, I know that's a struggle. I really do. But it's only when we struggle with it that we see the beauty of what comes next. Because we'll end here. We've seen the promise and we've seen the struggle. Let's end with the beauty. Because you're probably asking this question. The obvious question to ask at this point is, well, why then? Why the Israelites? If the Israelites are wicked too, how come they get to go into the promised land and the Anakites get destroyed? You're asking yourself that? You are now, because I've just told you to ask that. But or frame it differently. If Christians are wicked, then how come Christian believers get to enjoy heaven forever? Whereas the Bible teaches that those who don't trust in Jesus suffer the eternal punishment of hell. Why? Doesn't sound fair. You've got to be asking that question. I remember years ago, I was in Wales on holiday with a couple of friends, and one night we thought it'd be fun to go and lie outside, pitch darkness. I mean, it's Wales. There was nothing around, and we're gazing up at the sky. It was a cloudless night, and we could see stars upon stars upon stars. And it was awesome. And all 3 of us were Christians. And as we lay there looking up, we started to talk and talk about how amazing it was that the creator of all of this knew us and loved us. And we said to ourselves, how come we get to know the God of the universe? Why us? One of my friends' answer, he was adamant. He said, well, there must be something good that God saw in us. There must be something about us that he really wanted. Now that seems a logical conclusion, doesn't it? But actually it is a fatal misstep in Christian faith, because that thinking will kill off all joy and it will lead to a church full of self-righteous people. Because, we're the people that God must have really wanted. People who think that deep down they're better than others. Verse 6, understand then that it's not because of your righteousness that the Lord your God is giving you this good land to possess. For you are a stiff-necked people. You see, the Bible will not allow that conclusion. My unbelieving sister, she is no more deserving of God's judgment than I am. In fact, if you met her very genuinely, you'd find she's far nicer than I am. So how does it work? Well, Deuteronomy 9 continues with this long section all about the golden calf. And that was 40 years earlier, so it seems slightly funny. Why this big section about the golden calf? It was the start of their time in the wilderness. Now they're about to go into the promised land. Why go back to the time Moses goes up Mount Sinai to get the 10 Commandments? He was there for 40 days and 40 nights. And as he came down the mountain, as he headed back to the Israelite camp, he could hear cheering and he saw dancing. And then he saw it. He saw the golden calf. You see, while he had been gone, the Israelites had taken their jewelry, they'd given it to Aaron, and he'd melted it all down, and he'd built them this golden calf. And they were worshipping this golden calf and saying, here is out of Egypt. Now, verse 18. Follow with me. There's great beauty here. Verse 18. This is Moses speaking. Then once again I fell prostrate before the Lord for 40 days and 40 nights. I ate no bread and drank no water because of all the sin you have committed, doing what was evil in the Lord's sight, and so arousing his anger. I feared the anger and wrath of the Lord, for he was angry enough with you to destroy you. But again the Lord listened to me. And the Lord was angry enough with Aaron to destroy him. But at that time I prayed for Aaron too. That sinful thing of yours, the calf you had made, and burned it in the fire. Then I crushed it and ground it to powder and threw the dust into a stream that flowed down the mountain. Who's going, David? We'll go to the old school technology. Do you hear what's happening as Moses talks about the golden calf? Answer the question now. Why did the Israelites get into Canaan, get into the promised land rather than the Anakites? Because you read that section and you have to say, because of Moses. What does Moses do? The Israelites sin and Moses prays. And he fasts. And he cries out to God to have mercy. Have mercy, Lord, have mercy on them. And then he takes the golden calf and he crushes it. And he grinds it up. And he takes the ground up gold and he chucks it in a river so that it flows away. The Israelites get into the promised land because of Moses. Moses acted as a mediator between a holy God and a sinful people. He bridged the gap. He prayed on their behalf, and God forgave because of Moses. You can read Exodus 32, it's all there. And what is true for them is true for us, but not with Moses. You want to ask yourself, why us? How come we get to know the God of the universe? How come Christian believers get to enjoy the new creation for all eternity, avoiding the judgment of God? Because of the new and better Moses. Because there was one who came and he bridged the gap between a sinful people and a holy God. The one who prays on our behalf. He prayed and he keeps on praying. Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. The one who was crushed, whose blood flowed, so that our sins might be washed away, so that all who repent might enter the promised land. Now you know his name. His name is Jesus. He is the new and better Moses. And I hope that when you see this truth played out, you realize this is a beautiful scene. Because it's when we see what is going on in this chapter, we realize you and I are not righteous. We deserve the judgment of God. If you're here tonight and you're feeling proud of how good you are, thinking in some way you're better than others, of course God would want you. Why wouldn't he want you? Can you hear the stern warning in these verses for you? But equally, if you're here tonight and you're feeling guilty, feeling as though God couldn't possibly want you because of all the filth and mess in your life. Do you see the beauty here? Do you realize just how wonderful it is that Jesus stands between you and God? When God looks at you, he sees Jesus. He hears Jesus. And if you're trusting in Jesus, Jesus is saying, this one's with me, Father. They're one of mine. My sin, their sin, was washed by my blood. Do you know that great joy? Letting Jesus stand between you and God is the best possible place you can be. And that's the only reason we'll ever get to enter the promised land. Why don't I pray together? Forgive us, Lord, when we think we are what we're not. We tell ourselves we're righteous, despite what your word tells to us. Forgive us, Lord, when we turn you into someone that you are not, when we pretend that you can turn a blind eye to sin. You don't mind it, really. Father, please help us to see who we are, to see who you are, that we would see just how beautiful Jesus is, and that we would learn to trust in him every day, not as proud, not as those who are guilty, but as those who are full of faith in him. Amen.